The Evolution of the Bow and Arrow, a Weapon Through Time. Part 3. Listen closely now, because this is where the story stops being about weapons and starts being about us. Because the moment you realize the bow never truly disappeared is the moment you begin to understand something unsettling about human history itself. That no matter how advanced our tools become, we keep returning to the same ancient principles of focus, patience, restraint, and consequence. And the bow has always been the clearest mirror of those principles. Long after cannons thundered and muskets cracked across battlefields, long after smoke replaced silence, there were still men and women quietly drawing strings, not because they were outdated, but because the bow offered something newer weapons could not, a direct connection between intent and outcome. This is why archery did not vanish when gunpowder arrived. It simply retreated, adapted, and waited. In forests, mountains, deserts, and borderlands where firearms failed or were impractical, the bow endured as a tool of survival rather than conquest. Indigenous peoples across North America continued to rely on it for hunting and defense, not out of ignorance of firearms, but because the bow fit their environment, their movement, and their values. In Australia, Aboriginal hunters refined techniques that maximized efficiency with minimal waste, understanding animal behavior so deeply that the weapon became secondary to knowledge itself. In the frozen north of Canada, bows were adapted to cold conditions where metal failed and silence meant survival. In the British Isles, archery never fully left the cultural bloodstream, lingering in lore, sport, and folklore long after its military dominance faded. These were not relics of the past, they were parallel paths of technological evolution, moving quietly while the world focused on louder progress. What historians often miss is that the decline of archery in warfare was not purely technological, it was economic and political. Firearms were easier to train en masse, requiring less lifelong discipline, allowing rulers to raise armies quickly without investing in generations of skill development. Archery demanded patience from both the individual and the state, and patience is rarely compatible with empire. When governments chose guns over bows, they were choosing speed over mastery, quantity over quality, and centralized control over individual expertise. Yet this very choice created weaknesses, because firearms shifted power away from personal skill and toward supply chains, logistics, and industry. An archer could make arrows from local materials, maintain a bow with simple tools, and remain effective without constant resupply, while gunpowder armies became dependent on factories, transport, and standardized production. This dependence would later shape global conflicts in ways few early adopters anticipated. Even as firearms dominated open battlefields, archers found new roles, serving as scouts, hunters, and irregular fighters whose mobility and silence made them invaluable. During periods of resistance and guerrilla warfare, bows reappeared not as symbols of the past, but as practical solutions to modern problems. Silence avoided detection, reusable ammunition conserved resources, and skill replaced noise. This pattern repeated across continents whenever technology outpaced infrastructure, or when occupying forces underestimated local knowledge. Meanwhile, the cultural meaning of archery began to shift, transforming from a necessity into a discipline. In Japan, Kyudo evolved into a spiritual practice emphasizing posture, breathing, and mental clarity, preserving ancient techniques while redefining their purpose. In Europe, archery guilds and competitions kept skills alive through sport, embedding them in community life rather than conflict. In the United States and Canada, archery became intertwined with conservation ethics, promoting responsible hunting and respect for wildlife. These transformations were not accidents, they were adaptations, allowing the bow to survive by aligning with values that modern societies still needed but rarely named. At the same time, science began catching up to what ancient archers already knew intuitively. Biomechanics revealed how the human body stores and releases energy through coordinated movement. Psychology explored flow states identical to those described in centuries-old archery manuals. Materials science confirmed why certain wood combinations worked better than others, validating traditions dismissed as superstition. Each discovery reinforced the idea that archery was never primitive, only misunderstood. The bow was a system optimized through thousands of years of trial, error, and refinement, shaped by environments and cultures rather than laboratories. This realization sparked a revival, not just among hobbyists, but among engineers, athletes, and military researchers studying human-machine interaction. Olympic archery emerged as a global stage where ancient mechanics met modern precision, carbon fiber limbs echoing the curves of composite bows crafted millennia earlier. Competitive archers trained with the same intensity once reserved for warriors, mastering consistency under pressure, proving that the bow still demanded excellence. Yet even here, the essence remained unchanged, because no matter how advanced the equipment became, the decisive factor was still the archer's mind. This continuity across time is what makes archery unique, because it refuses to separate technology from humanity. Every arrow carries a lesson about commitment, because once released, it cannot be recalled. This simple truth shaped ethical frameworks around archery long before modern discussions about responsibility in technology. Ancient societies understood that range power required restraint, and they built rituals, laws, and teachings around this understanding. Today, as humanity grapples with technologies that act at a distance, from drones to algorithms, the bow's legacy feels unexpectedly relevant. It reminds us that power without accountability is dangerous, and that mastery requires humility. When we look back at legendary shots that changed history, we often focus on accuracy, but accuracy was never the whole story. Timing, judgment, and intention mattered just as much. An arrow released too early or too late was useless, regardless of skill. This awareness shaped how archers perceived time itself, training them to wait, observe, and act only when conditions aligned. In a world increasingly driven by immediacy, this philosophy stands in stark contrast. The bow teaches that waiting is not weakness, that stillness can be strength, and that action gains meaning through restraint. As modern archers rediscover ancient techniques, they are not merely recreating history, they are engaging in dialogue with it, asking what was lost when speed replaced patience. Museums display bows behind glass, but their true stories live in motion, in the rhythm of draw and release, in the quiet before impact. And perhaps this is why the bow continues to fascinate us, because it asks something of the user that modern tools rarely do. It demands presence. You cannot look away, you cannot rush, you cannot delegate responsibility. In that moment, it is just you, the bow, and the target, a relationship unchanged by centuries. And as we follow this thread forward, toward the present and beyond, we begin to see that the bow's greatest influence may not be behind us at all, but ahead, waiting to be rediscovered in ways that could shape the future as profoundly as it shaped the past. And that future begins to reveal itself the moment we stop asking why the bow survived and start asking what it has been quietly teaching us all along, because hidden beneath wood, sinew, and string is a philosophy that civilizations once understood instinctively and modern societies are only beginning to rediscover, the understanding that technology is never neutral, that it shapes the way humans think, behave, and relate to one another, and the bow shaped humanity in ways far deeper than warfare alone. For tens of thousands of years, archery trained humans to think ahead, to visualize outcomes before action, to respect distance and consequence, and this mental framework influenced everything from hunting strategies to leadership decisions. An archer learned early that strength without control was useless, that impatience led to failure, and that success depended on harmony between body, tool, and environment. These lessons extended far beyond the battlefield, quietly influencing cultural values wherever archery was central to life. In societies where bows dominated, leadership was often associated with calm judgment rather than brute force, because those who mastered the bow understood the cost of rash decisions. Elders and teachers emphasized discipline, repetition, and humility, knowing that arrogance ruined accuracy. Even myths reflected this mindset, portraying archers as heroes who succeeded through wisdom rather than rage, through restraint rather than excess. As history moved forward and firearms reshaped power structures, many of these values faded from prominence, replaced by systems that rewarded speed, volume, and industrial capacity. Yet the human need for meaning, balance, and mastery did not disappear, it simply went unmet. This gap explains why archery resurfaces again and again during periods of cultural uncertainty, offering a tangible way to reconnect with principles modern life often neglects. In the 20th century, as mechanized warfare reached unprecedented scales of destruction, the bow took on new symbolic weight, representing an older relationship with power that felt more personal and accountable. Veterans turned to archery for rehabilitation, finding in its rhythm a way to regain control over bodies and minds disrupted by trauma. Therapists discovered that drawing a bow required focus without aggression, making it a powerful tool for rebuilding confidence and emotional regulation. Educators introduced archery to teach patience and self-discipline in ways lectures never could. None of this was accidental, because the bow engages humans at a fundamental neurological level, aligning movement, breath, and intention into a single act. Neuroscience now confirms what ancient instructors taught without textbooks, that such alignment induces a state of flow where learning accelerates and stress diminishes. This scientific validation has sparked renewed interest in archery not as a sport alone, but as a method of human development. Meanwhile, technology itself has begun circling back toward principles the bow embodied from the beginning. Modern engineers studying human-machine interaction increasingly emphasize intuitive control, feedback loops, and user responsibility, concepts archery perfected long ago. Even autonomous systems raise questions eerily similar to those ancient societies grappled with when regulating archers, questions about accountability at a distance and the ethics of unseen force. The bow's history offers a cautionary tale here, because cultures that respected its power thrived longer than those that abused it. When archery was integrated with ethical training, it stabilized societies, but when it became merely a tool of domination, it accelerated collapse. This pattern appears repeatedly across history, reminding us that technology amplifies values already present rather than creating new ones. As climate change, resource scarcity, and technological acceleration reshape the modern world, the bow's adaptability becomes newly relevant. Its reliance on renewable materials, local craftsmanship, and human skill contrasts sharply with systems dependent on global supply chains and rare resources. Some futurists now look backward for inspiration, exploring decentralized technologies that emphasize resilience over efficiency, echoing the logic that once made archery indispensable. In remote regions, bows remain practical tools where modern infrastructure fails, not because these communities are behind, but because they understand something essential about sustainability. This understanding challenges linear narratives of progress that equate newer with better, reminding us that endurance often matters more than novelty. Culturally, archery continues weaving itself into modern identity through film, literature, and digital media, where archers symbolize individuality in a world of mass systems. Audiences instinctively respond to these figures, sensing the weight of responsibility carried by someone who must aim carefully and accept consequences. This resonance explains why archers remain compelling protagonists even in futuristic settings, because they represent a human anchor amid technological abstraction. They remind us that precision still matters, that choices still carry weight, and that mastery cannot be automated. At the same time, global archery communities now share knowledge once confined to isolated cultures, reconstructing lost techniques through collaboration rather than conquest. This collective effort marks a shift from domination to preservation, from secrecy to stewardship. Ancient bow designs are tested, refined, and sometimes surpassed, not to replace tradition, but to understand it more deeply. Through this process, modern archers gain insight not only into history, but into themselves, discovering limits of patience, focus, and resilience. Yet despite this revival, the bow remains misunderstood by many, dismissed as a hobby or novelty rather than recognized as a teacher. This misunderstanding mirrors a broader discomfort with slowness in a world addicted to speed. Archery refuses to be rushed, exposing impatience mercilessly, which is precisely why it endures as a corrective force. It insists that attention is valuable, that preparation matters, and that outcomes reflect inner states as much as external conditions. These truths become clearer as we trace the bow's influence into the present moment, where ancient practice intersects with modern life in unexpected ways. Competitive archers speak of matches decided not by strength but by mental composure, echoing lessons taught thousands of years ago. Hunters emphasize ethical shots and respect for animals, reinforcing principles of responsibility that predate written law. Recreational archers describe a sense of grounding rare in other activities, a feeling of being fully present that modern distractions rarely allow. All of these experiences point toward the same conclusion, that the bow's survival is not accidental or nostalgic, but necessary. It persists because it addresses fundamental human needs technology alone cannot satisfy. And as we approach the final stretch of this journey, the question shifts once more, not whether the bow belongs in the future, but what kind of future humanity wants to build, one driven entirely by speed and distance, or one that remembers the value of intention, restraint, and care, because the answer to that question may determine whether the lessons carried by a simple arc of wood and string are finally understood, or once again forgotten. And in that choice between forgetting and remembering lies the quiet power of the bow, because unlike technologies that demand attention through spectacle, the bow waits patiently for those willing to listen, offering lessons that only reveal themselves through practice rather than proclamation. As the modern world accelerates, compressing time and distance until actions feel abstract and consequences delayed, the bow stands as a rare counterbalance, insisting that distance does not erase responsibility and that speed does not replace judgment. This insistence is why archery continues to shape individuals long after its era of military dominance ended, influencing how people think, decide, and act in subtle but profound ways. When an archer steps onto the range, nothing else matters. Not notifications, not noise, not external pressure, because accuracy demands presence, and presence cannot be faked. This demand mirrors challenges humanity now faces on a global scale, where decisions made at a distance can affect lives unseen, and where the temptation to act quickly often outweighs the discipline to act wisely. The bow's enduring relevance emerges here, not as a weapon, but as a teacher reminding us that mastery begins within. Throughout history, societies that understood this principle integrated archery into rites of passage, governance, and education, ensuring that those entrusted with power first learned restraint. Leaders were expected to demonstrate composure under pressure, patience in preparation, and accountability in outcome, traits honed through archery long before they were applied to leadership. When these traditions eroded, power became detached from personal responsibility, setting the stage for excess and collapse. This pattern resonates today, as technological systems increasingly separate decision-makers from consequences, amplifying the need for frameworks that reconnect intent and impact. The bow offers such a framework, embodied rather than theoretical, requiring no ideology to function, only honesty. As modern archers rediscover ancient forms, they often describe a shift in perspective, realizing that success depends less on forcing outcomes and more on aligning with conditions. Wind, distance, fatigue, and emotion all matter, teaching adaptability rather than control. This adaptability mirrors ecological thinking essential for addressing contemporary challenges, where rigid solutions fail in complex systems. The bow thrives in complexity because it evolved within it, shaped by environments that demanded flexibility. This evolutionary heritage contrasts sharply with linear models of progress, suggesting that resilience emerges from diversity rather than uniformity. Across Australia, the US, Canada, and the UK, archery communities increasingly emphasize tradition alongside innovation, blending ancient techniques with modern safety and inclusivity. These communities function as living archives, preserving knowledge not through books alone, but through shared experience. Elders teach novices not merely how to shoot, but how to listen, how to slow down, how to accept failure as instruction rather than defeat. Such teachings feel radical in cultures obsessed with optimization, yet they resonate precisely because something essential has been missing. Even in popular culture, the archer's image continues to evolve, shifting from solitary warrior to symbol of mindful resistance against chaos. This shift reflects a growing awareness that power divorced from responsibility is unsustainable, and that technologies requiring deliberate engagement may offer healthier models for the future. In educational settings, archery programs demonstrate measurable improvements in focus, confidence, and emotional regulation, reinforcing the idea that ancient practices can address modern needs. In therapeutic contexts, the bow provides a nonverbal language for processing experience, allowing individuals to regain trust in their bodies and decisions. None of this suggests a return to the past, but rather a rebalancing, integrating old wisdom with new understanding. The bow's arc across history thus forms a loop rather than a line, returning humanity to questions it has always needed to ask: how much power is enough, when should action be taken, and who bears responsibility for the outcome? These questions grow more urgent as humanity's tools extend reach without increasing wisdom at the same rate. The bow reminds us that reach and wisdom once grew together, that skill demanded character, and that technology served human development rather than replacing it. As we stand at the edge of an uncertain future, this reminder becomes invaluable. The bow does not promise safety or certainty, only clarity, offering a mirror in which users see their own state reflected in the flight of an arrow. Misses reveal distraction, hits confirm alignment, and improvement follows attention rather than force. This feedback loop embodies a philosophy modern systems often lack, one where learning is continuous and humility rewarded. When historians trace the bow's influence, they often search for dates, battles, and artifacts, yet its true legacy lives in habits of mind passed quietly from teacher to student across millennia. That legacy cannot be measured in conquests or casualties, but in moments of stillness before action, in choices made with care, and in respect for consequences. As this journey through time concludes, the bow stands not behind us, but beside us, offering guidance without insisting, waiting for those willing to slow down and aim carefully. Whether humanity chooses to heed these lessons remains uncertain, but the bow's endurance suggests that the need for them will never disappear. And so the story ends not with an impact, but with a pause, the moment before release, when everything depends on intention, reminding us that history, like archery, is shaped not only by the tools we create, but by the restraint with which we choose to use them. And yet even after all of this, there is one final layer still hidden in plain sight. Because if the bow has followed humanity from survival to warfare to mindfulness, then what happens when ancient principles meet future technology? What if the bow's logic is already shaping innovations we haven't recognized yet? What forgotten techniques are being rediscovered right now in remote workshops and underground ranges? And how might archery influence the next generation of tools designed to act at a distance? Will the lessons of restraint and responsibility finally be carried forward, or will they be ignored once again? And what happens when modern science fully decodes the secrets ancient bowyers understood by instinct alone? In Part 4, we will explore how archery is quietly influencing the future, from biomechanics and AI training models to sustainable technology and human performance, uncovering connections that challenge everything we think we know about progress. So if you want to see where the bow's story leads next and what it reveals about humanity's future, make sure you follow, subscribe, and stay with us for Part 4, because the final arrow has not yet been released.